Welcome! Over the past years, I've made a lot of fermenting crocks like this. And today, we're gonna make a bunch more. But better, of course. So please stay with me until the end of the video and I will show you all the different steps of making a fermenting crock like this. Before I start making the pot, let me just explain a few important things about fermenting crocks. The whole idea is to create a water lock, a sealing, because when you ferment something like vegetables, it will create gases, and those gases need to escape. So what most people do is they keep them in closed containers, and then on a regular basis during the fermentation, they need to lift the lid a little bit to let out the gases. But the problem with that is that when you lift up the lid, you also risk having external bacteria get into your fermenting. That's not good. It will mold or it will become vinegarish or it's just not very good. So similar to a wine brewing glass cylinder, you have this little water lock. So because you have water in this flange in here and you put the lid into that water, it creates a lock, but the pressure from the inside is enough to let the inside gases out. But the outside, of course, doesn't have a pressure, so it won't get into the pot. So that's the sealing you make. And it also, of course, looks much more beautiful than these standard IKEA glasses or whatever you want to use. But it has a function that's very important. So making them, there's of course the question of size. This is like a moderate size. It's a couple of liters. I like it to be a little bigger for the ones that I'm making now. And also the hole here should be big enough in any case for your hands to get in so you can push down whatever you're fermenting. And this flange for the water lock needs to be big enough for the water not to evaporate too fast. If it's a long fermentation, some of the things I ferment, like chilies, goes for a whole month, 30 days. I will need to add a little more water as we go, but that's fine. You just don't want it to be so small that you have to fill it up like every day or something. And then of course we need to have a lid that fits this. We're going to do that in the end. So let's get started. For this, this first one, I'm going to be using some reclaimed clay. It's a little bit on the soft side, so it can be difficult to make it thin enough. I can trim it away tomorrow. So I'm starting out with 4 kilo for this. Also because I want to make these ones a little bit bigger than this, because in my family, we really love fermented foods like kimchi. My daughter loves it so much. And I've been selling a lot of these pots too. And if you're interested, let me know, write a comment, contact me on email. They will be finished in a couple of weeks. So let's see how fast they go this time. Anyway, we're going to start with the jar part of it. I'm not too concerned about making them exactly the same size because we're going to measure the lid for every single one of them to make them fit. The good thing about soft clay is that it's a lot easier to center. The downside is that it's not as stable, but I think we'll survive for this. And as always, when dealing with larger pieces of clay, I like to use my potter's needle to check the thickness of the bottom. And this is of course way too thick. So you need to take a little more out. Let me just check again. Yeah, I think it's almost there. I do want some thickness because I'm going to trim a foot on these ones. A very important thing for these fermenting crocks is to leave enough clay up here because we need that deep wide gallery. And if you don't have enough clay, that's not going to be possible. It is very soft, but it makes it nice to throw, a little bit challenging, but easy in a way. Also, to make a lid that fit, it's important that it's not wobbling too much because, of course, then it will be very difficult to make it fit. So now we have the basic shape of the jar. Now I need to do the gallery. That's the tricky part. And because this clay is so soft, I want to dry it a little bit so it doesn't torque it and get out of shape. I think that's good enough. it just needs to be strong enough for me to make this gallery. So I need to make sure that this is wet, of course. You can use a tool for that. I like to use something like this, just to do the initial push down, and it just goes easy because you don't want it to slip over the edges. And you want it in the middle because you want both the inside and the outside edge to be strong, because it is kitchenware. It is something you're going to use, and as such, it will also be pushed around and washed and stuff. So you don't want to make it too fragile. If you have some tools that are a little bit wider, that may be good. I don't, so I'm just going to use a combination of that tool and then a sponge and my fingers. I'm going to pull up a little more of that clay from underneath to make sure that the inner wall is big enough and not too thin. And the same thing with the outer wall. And ideally you want these two walls to be almost the same height, because the water won't be able to get any higher than what is the lowest one. So it makes sense for them to be about the same height. And also be careful that you don't make it too thin down here. So keep your hands under to make sure that there's enough clay, because in the beginning I made some, and then suddenly my finger was going through and it was, functionally destroyed. Now it's done so far. I will put it to rest and dry a little bit to a leather hard stage, and I will trim it tomorrow, I think it will. And then we'll move on to the lid. But before I do that, of course, I need to measure how wide it should be. In order to get the lid floating into the curve of the pot, I would like the lid to sit as far out as possible. So that's what we are going to aim for. So a little less than this. So yeah. So that's the outer width of the lid. I'm going to save that here. Now we can move this to my drying shelf and get back to this tomorrow. For the lid, I'm going to use about 800 grams of clay. So what is that? 1.5 pounds, something like that. I'm going to trim a lot of it out because I'm going to trim a knob. So it's way more clay than the final lid is going to be. I'm going to throw it upside down. So I'm going to basically throw a small bowl that fits the jar and with a very narrow foot, and it's going to turn it around, and that foot is going to be the knob. So I'm going to make it as narrow as possible, not to waste too much clay. And then a bowl with straight sides, because I want this part to sit into the gallery of the jar. So I'm just going to take a quick measure, and we are very far from the result. That's good. That's as I expected. Just take again. And quite a lot. So slowly getting there. Yeah, I think 1 more centimeter or something like that. Yeah. And now it's just a matter of a few millimeters. Yeah, it's almost there. I want to make sure that the sides here are very straight, so they sit well into the pot. And the inside I like to be very smooth and nice. I'm also using this as a pot or a plate, so when the fermenting is done, I take it off and take something out and I put it in this like a small plate. And so it needs to be nice and smooth on the inside too. There's a little bit of a bulb of clay here. Maybe it's because it's reclaimed, so I'm gonna take that off. In general, for the lid here, I prefer that it's a little bit too big or too high. So I'm sure that it fits the jar well enough. Because I can always trim it down a little bit. When it's dry, I can try it out on the jar and see if it's working well. Just want to make sure that I don't make it too big. Yeah, that's it. Just gonna clean the inside. And clean the bed so I don't have too much slip. And now it's ready to dry. And it's important that you make the lid and the jar at the same time. So you measure this based on the jar that is wet too, because then when it shrinks, it should fit. So put this to drying shelves as well, and I'll be ready to trim this tomorrow. So let's make another one. And this time I'm going to be using a little more clay. I think maybe 5-6 kilo, still reclaim, because the first lump of clay I used, I couldn't get enough out of it because it is very soft. So we'll try with this one. So let's go ahead. Yeah, see, this is getting much better. It's still very tricky to throw on fresh, wet, and very soft clay like this, but it's okay. So I'm beginning to like the shape again. I think I could make it much bigger if it wasn't this wet reclaim. I should have dried a little more, but that's how it is. I'm going to trim some of it away. So again, I think I need to dry it a little bit before I do the flange here to have enough strength. So I think that looks okay. It's still a little bit chunky. I will trim the foot a bit and I'll trim out the thickness, but it's just too wet to make it any thinner. So let's do the lid. almost there. So I think if I just perfect the shape here. I think it's almost there. Yeah. I'm just gonna make it a little bit higher because I can always cut it, but I can't make it any higher. And I want to make sure that it's high enough to stick out of the jar. Yeah. It got a little bit uneven at the top, but that's easy to fix. Yep, that's it. Just gonna clean it up and put this one to dry as well. Now it's time to do some trimming, and especially the lids need a lot of trimming because I'm going to turn them around, and what is now the bottom is going to be the nut. So I'll just start out by trimming the sides a little bit, just make it nice here. It's almost the way it should be, and then I will turn it around. And see now, because it's still attached to the bed, I can check if it's too high here on the jar. So let me just get that. So now we can see if it fits here. It does fit. And I think it looks okay. It could lose a little bit. So I think I'm going to trim it down just a little bit. And then I'll move on to trimming the jar. I think that looks good. And then I'll use a shiny stone to just burnish this a little bit so it becomes really nice and smooth. Because also this part is not going to be glazed because it's going to sit on that. So it's nice if it's just super smooth. And so I think that looks good. So now it's time to reveal it or liberate it from the bed. So we need to cut it off. So here we have the lid. And it's a little bit thick here, so I'll trim away some of that, and then I will create a lid from what is now the bottom. It will be the top. if you use a little bit of water, it will often be enough to actually make it stick. You may also add a few lumps of clay. Of course, you need to center it first. And I'm just doing manual centering here. So, just hammer it a little bit. And I'll take a little bit of clay and use that to secure it. Because I already trimmed the sides, so I don't need to get into that. And again, always when you're adding clay to hold it in place, push it down on your wheel head, not into your pot, because that may break it. So just like that, just a little bit in there. That should secure it enough. So now it's time to thin it out a little bit. And first I'm going to mark the outer part of the lid. I think that's going to be it. I'm going to take that away. So it's sort of like a bowl, but I'm gonna undercut this. But first, it's very thick here, so I'm gonna make it much thinner here. And I'm deliberately leaving trimming marks on this because the glaze I'm going to use, folk art gilt white, is going to leave some beautiful variations when you have these marks. So now I can go in under it. Create more of a lob feel to it. closely getting there. And I'm also gonna round off the edges here, because any sharp edges are more likely to chip off. And then I'm gonna use my maker's mark. Let me see. I have this round one, and I think actually I have two different ones. And I'm gonna use this in the middle. So, like that. I'm just gonna cut some very fine marks in this. And again, this is gonna look beautiful when we when I do the application of the glaze. And you can sometimes hear if you got enough off. Otherwise, of course, you can always remove the protection here and feel. Yeah, it feels nice and light. So this is gonna go on top of the jar. I think it looks beautiful. So let's trim the jar. For the jar, I'm just gonna trim the shape a little bit. I need to take off some of the clay in the foot. That was a little too much, and it's gonna make it look a little more elegant and a little more rounded. I'll take away some of that. For the wider parts of a side like this, I like to use a little bit of a bigger trimming tool, a loop tool. And you see, already now starts to look much more elegant. And again, I'm actually aiming for some turning marks, because again, this glaze that I'm going to use will just look better. See, I think it looks good. One thing I will do on the inside, let me just take the camera a little bit closer here, because one thing I'm going to do on the inside is down here. It's a little bit round, and I want to have a good foot, a good lock for the lid to sit on. So I'm actually going to use a small loop tool and just trim the bed that's going to sit on here. Make it a little more square. And I know this can be difficult to see on the video, but I'm basically just making sure that the bed of this gallery, the waterlock, is flat, so the lid sits perfectly there. Now if we take the lid, we can just try and see how it fits now. It's still a little bit dry, a little bit wet here, so I can't hold it on the knob. But if you put it down here, now it sits really well. And also you can see now the curve of the pot and the lid sort of blends into each other. I think that looks good. It could have been a little bit bigger, but it sits pretty well there in the middle of this waterlock. So now I'm just going to test how thick it is, and I could take a little bit more on the lower part. I didn't make this too thick. You know the feeling? It usually happens to me. You know what? Some cutters would say that this is a waste of time and I should be able to throw it better. And ideally, they're right. But you know what? I actually like trimming. I enjoy the process of trimming. And even though I practiced a lot, I'm not able to make things as thin as I would. And also for bigger pots like this, if I make it too thin down here, it will collapse. So it's better to make it a little bit too thick and then trim it off. Of course, you are wasting some clay here, but since I'm reclaiming all my clay, so I'm reusing it, I'm not actually throwing anything out, so I'm not wasting anything. But of course, it takes another step. But that's okay, because this is not my full-time living, so I don't have to calculate the minutes that I spent. That's just good for me. If you're a production potter and need to optimize your time, then I definitely see a good reason to try and learn how to throw without trimming. But I don't have that problem, so. So final step here is to, let me just find it here. Just gonna cut away a little bit of clay down here. So I can cut it loose without dragging in too much clay. It's actually not that heavy, so surprisingly good. And I'm just gonna put it like that. And I do have like, I don't know, 1.5 centimeter maybe. I'm gonna trim the lower part of it and the foot. I'm gonna trim a foot, and so I'm just gonna start out by making the piece where it's gonna sit completely flat. And just move a little bit so it's a little more circular here. Now I'm gonna mark the inner part of the rim. So now we have a nice rim mark, at least. Now we're gonna remove some clay from in here. And first I'm going to use the corner, because that's going to create the least drag on the clay, so it doesn't jump around. And then I can slowly remove the heights of it afterwards. And then finally I'm going to use a very white one just to even it all out. It's a little bit on the soft side. It's always like that when you get down to the foot and you turn it around, because of course the sides have dried a bit faster, but it's fine. use your finger to sort of polish it if you want it totally smooth. And always again here around the corners, just a little bit, because if the corners are too sharp, then there's a big risk that it will crack off. So for this one, I will use my maker's mark here on the side. Like that. And now we're done. See, I made this mistake. There was a little bit of scraps left here. Have to keep your wheel head clean when you turn your pots. I know, but it's okay. I'll just clean it here. And I will, as I mentioned a couple of times, I will fire the lid and the jar separately when I do the glaze frying, which means I can have glaze all the way down here, and only the lowest part of the lid is not going to have glaze. But when you put it in here, it's going to look like the whole pot is glazed. And I like that look. Also, by glazing, even though, of course, it will be vitrified in the end, clay, by glazing the waterlock in here, it's going to be completely water sealed. I think that's best. So let's see how it looks with the lid on now. I think that's beautiful. So now I'm going to put this back on the drying shelves and let it dry for a couple of days, and then I will specify it. And next step is glazing, but that's going to be for another video. I hope you enjoyed this. I will do the other parts, but it's going to be exactly like this. Of course, the shapes are a little bit different, but it's basically the same procedure. I throw them, next day I trim them, and then they need, these ones probably need like a week or something to dry, and then I will fry them. I will get back to you when I glaze them. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe, share, write a comment, and I hope to see you again next Sunday at 5 p.m. Central European Time, where I hope to have another video for you. So until then, enjoy the summer. It's finally getting there in Denmark too. So have a great day.